Raymond Miller hadn't intended to visit the cafe at 61, his aging body a constant reminder of the miles he'd walked and the comrades he'd carried. He preferred to remain unnoticed, but a sudden downpour left him with little choice. The trendy downtown cafe was the only refuge within his limited walking distance. He stood at the entrance, water dripping from his gray beard and worn army jacket, his old duffel bag, faded and frayed, hanging heavily from his shoulder. He hesitated, feeling immediately out of place among the sleek wooden tables and patrons engrossed in their laptops. The aroma of expensive coffee and fresh pastries filled the warm air, a stark contrast to the cold rain seeping through his worn-out boots. Raymond took a deep breath and stepped inside, carefully choosing a small corner table away from most customers. A young barista with styled hair approached, eyeing Raymond's soaked appearance with poorly disguised disdain. "Can I help you?" His tone suggested the opposite of assistance. "Just a water, please," Raymond said quietly. "Until the rain passes." The barista's eyebrows raised. "Minimum purchase required for seating," he said. "This isn't a shelter." Raymond nodded, reaching into his pocket with arthritic fingers. "I can manage a small coffee," he said, placing 3 crumpled dollar bills on the table, nearly half his remaining cash. The barista made no move to take the money. "That won't cover our specialty coffee," his voice had risen deliberately, loud, enough for nearby tables to hear. "No purchase, no seat. This ain't a shelter." The cafe had grown quiet, conversations pausing as heads turned toward the confrontation. Raymond felt the weight of their stares, the same stares he'd felt ever since returning home with injuries that weren't visible but never stopped hurting. "I understand," Raymond said, slowly rising. "I'll just wait outside under the awning." As he reached for his duffel, a well-dressed man at the next table wrinkled his nose and announced loudly, "He stinks. Can't you smell that?" Laughter rippled through the cafe. Raymond kept his eyes down, focusing on gathering his bag. The bag that had accompanied him through 2 tours, 3 surgeries, and countless nights under bridges when his disability check couldn't stretch to cover both medication and rent. The barista moved around the counter, now openly hostile. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately. You're disturbing our customers." Raymond didn't argue. He never did. Arguments cost energy he couldn't spare. He limped toward the door, but the barista was impatient. With a quick step forward, he took Raymond's elbow, pulling him toward the exit. The sudden movement caught Raymond off balance. His duffel slipped, hitting the ground with enough force to dislodge the contents. Among the sparse belongings that spilled out onto the polished concrete floor was a small mesh bag containing something that caught the light. A purple heart medal, its distinctive shape and purple-edged ribbon unmistakable. A woman at a nearby table noticed it, her coffee cup freezing halfway to her lips. For a moment, something like recognition crossed her face, but she quickly looked away, unwilling to get involved. The barista either didn't see or didn't care. He shoved the scattered items back into the bag with the toe of his shoe and thrust it at Raymond. "Take your stuff and go." Raymond knelt painfully, retrieving the medal himself and tucking it carefully back into the mesh bag. His movements were methodical, dignified despite the humiliation. Not one person in the bustling cafe offered to help as he stepped back into the pouring rain, clutching the purple heart inside his jacket to keep it dry. The cafe door closed behind him with definitive finality. If you believe respect shouldn't depend on appearances, this channel is for you. Stay. The rain showed no signs of letting up. After 20 minutes of standing under the insufficient awning, Raymond decided to try the public park 2 blocks away. At least the gazebo there might offer better shelter. He made his way slowly down the street, each step a negotiation between determination and pain. The park was mercifully empty. The rain had chased away the usual crowd. Raymond claimed a dry corner of the wooden gazebo and carefully set down his duffel. With privacy at last, he unzipped the bag and checked its precious contents. The water hadn't penetrated the outer canvas, leaving his few possessions dry. He pulled out the mesh bag containing his Purple Heart, awarded after the helicopter extraction gone wrong in Afghanistan. The metal caught what little light filtered. Through the rain clouds, its purple center a vivid contrast to the silver outline. Next came a folded American flag in a plastic protective sleeve, the one draped over his best friend's coffin before being presented to a family who later sent it to Raymond with a note. "He would want you to have this. You were more his brother than we ever were." At the bottom of the bag lay a worn photograph in a simple frame. 12 men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, standing before a transport helicopter. Raymond gently wiped dust from the glass with his thumb. Only 5 of those men had returned home. Lastly, he retrieved an envelope containing his most recent letter from his daughter, Sophia. Their relationship had been strained since his return. His PTSD, her resentment of his absence during childhood, his inability to maintain stable employment or housing. She wrote monthly from her college dorm in another state, the letters formal, but consistent. "Ray, is that you, Alpha 9? The voice startled him. Raymond looked up to see a man in a weather-beaten coat approaching the gazebo, his own belongings in a shopping cart parked nearby. "Charlie?" Raymond squinted, recognizing a fellow veteran he'd occasionally encountered at the VA hospital. Charlie climbed the gazebo steps, his own movements betraying similar injuries. "Thought that was you. Been a while since the support group." Raymond nodded. He'd stopped attending the weekly meetings after losing his apartment, too ashamed to admit he joined the ranks of homeless veterans despite all the programs supposedly designed to prevent exactly that outcome. "You still with your daughter?" Charlie asked, settling onto the bench with a groan that spoke of familiar pains. "No," Raymond admitted. "She's at college now, doing well. She doesn't know about this." He gestured vaguely at the duffel bag and his obvious situation. "And she won't." Raymond's tone left no room for argument. "She's finally getting ahead, building her own life. I won't be her burden." Charlie nodded in understanding. Many of them made similar choices, protecting those they loved from the reality of what had become of them after service. On his phone, an ancient flip model kept only for emergencies. A notification lit up the tiny screen, something about a viral video. Raymond rarely checked social media, but boredom and the need to distract himself from the throbbing in his back won out. He opened the link to find himself staring at his own humiliation. Someone in the cafe had recorded his ejection, adding mocking commentary. The caption read, "Homeless veteran drama. Watch this freeloader get served." It already had thousands of views and hateful comments questioning whether he was even a real veteran. Across town, in a comfortable suburban home, a man named David. Harrison scrolled through his phone during a boring conference call. The video algorithm suggested homeless veteran drama, and he clicked out of idle curiosity. The blood drained from his face as he recognized the man being escorted from the cafe. "Sergeant Miller," he whispered, abruptly standing up and walking out of the meeting, leaving confused colleagues staring after him. David Harrison had never forgotten the sergeant who had carried him 2 miles through mountain terrain after an IED took out their transport and shattered David's leg. The same sergeant who had then gone back for 3 more wounded men despite his own injuries. The sergeant whose spine had been permanently damaged in the process, a fact the military doctors had tried to downplay when processing his discharge. David's hands shook as he dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Marcus, it's David. Have you seen what they did to Sergeant Miller?" By nightfall, the video had been shared in private veterans groups across the country, eliciting a very different reaction than the public mockery. Phones lit up, messages exchanged, plans formed, and Raymond, unaware of the gathering storm, spent the night on a park bench, his duffel serving as both pillow and security system, the Purple Heart, tucked against his chest like a talisman. He never begged, he never yelled. He just left with a medal in his pocket and rain in his shoes. If you've ever seen someone disrespected for looking different, type dignity. Dawn broke over the city with unexpected clarity after the previous day's downpour. Raymond woke with the sun, as he had every day since basic training decades ago. His body protested every movement, the damp weather having settled into his joints overnight. He used the park's public restroom to wash his face and brush his teeth, maintaining what dignity he could with limited resources. Years of military discipline showed in how he folded his few possessions and methodically repacked his duffel. In the cafe across from the park, the morning shift was beginning. The same barista from yesterday was setting up outdoor tables, whistling, as he arranged chairs with no memory of the old man he'd humiliated. The first customers trickled in, ordering elaborate coffee drinks and scrolling through phones while waiting. No one noticed the first military truck until it turned onto the street and stopped directly in front of the cafe, its diesel engine rumbling loudly enough to vibrate the store's windows. A second truck appeared from the opposite direction, then a third. Within minutes, 5 Army transport vehicles had effectively sealed off the entire block. Pedestrians stopped in confusion. Cafe patrons pressed against the windows. The barista stood frozen, coffee pot in hand, as uniformed men and women began exiting the vehicles. They weren't active duty. That much was clear from their age range and the variety of their uniforms. Some wore desert camouflage from Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns. Others wore older battle dress uniforms from earlier conflicts. Each uniform displayed combat patches, unit insignia, and rows of ribbons that told stories of service and sacrifice. Leading them was Lieutenant Colonel Carla Rodriguez, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform impeccable despite being a decade removed from active duty. She moved with the confident authority of someone accustomed to command. "Attention," she called, and 50 veterans snapped into a perfect formation on the sidewalk, creating a line that stretched the length of the block. Customers spilled out of the cafe and neighboring businesses, phones raised to record the unexpected military display. Among the gathering crowd stood Raymond, drawn from the park by the commotion, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition as he spotted familiar faces in formation. Colonel Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding, as she addressed the now silent spectators. Yesterday, at this establishment, a man was publicly humiliated and expelled because of his appearance. That man, she pointed directly at Raymond in the crowd, is Sergeant First Class Raymond Miller, former leader of Alpha 9 Rescue Team, 10th Mountain Division. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. The barista who had ejected Raymond visibly paled. "This cafe," Colonel Rodriguez continued, her voice carrying down the block, "turned away a man who once carried 4 injured soldiers on his back through hostile territory under enemy fire after their vehicle was hit by an IED. A man who refused evacuation until every member of his team was accounted for, resulting in permanent spinal damage that the VA still hasn't properly addressed." She gestured, and 2 veterans stepped forward, carrying a large wooden sign, which they positioned directly in front of the cafe entrance. "This place refused a hero. We remember." The crowd had grown silent, many lowering their phones as the reality of what they were witnessing sank in. The barista pushed through the door, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't know," he stammered. "How could I know? He didn't say anything about being a veteran." Colonel Rodriguez fixed him with a steady gaze. "That's exactly the point, son. The real heroes rarely announce themselves. They don't wear their medals on their sleeves. They carry their pain privately and expect nothing." From the back of the crowd, Raymond limped forward. The veterans instantly parted to create a path for him. Despite his worn clothes and unshaven face, there was a dignity in his bearing that commanded respect. "This isn't necessary," he said quietly to Colonel Rodriguez. "I'm not worth all this trouble." "With all due respect, Sergeant," she replied, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you don't get to decide your worth to us." The barista approached Raymond, visibly shaking. "Sir, I'm so sorry for how I treated you. If I had known—" Raymond cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't apologize to me," he said, his voice gravelly but clear. "Apologize to the uniform. Apologize to everyone who ever wore it. Whether you can see it or not, David Harrison stepped forward from the formation, moving on a prosthetic leg concealed beneath his dress pants. "Sergeant Miller saved my life," he announced to the crowd. "I was a 20-year-old kid bleeding out in the mountains. He carried me for 2 miles with a damaged spine. Then he went back for 3 more of us, one by one." Other veterans stepped forward to tell their stories, not all involving Raymond directly, but all highlighting the invisible bonds that connected those who had served and the invisible wounds many of them carried home. Inside the cafe, staff frantically removed the "no shirt, no service" sign from the window. The manager appeared, offering free coffee to all veterans present. Colonel Rodriguez declined politely but firmly. "We didn't come for coffee or apologies," she said. "We came because when one of us is disrespected, all of us are, and because too many of our brothers and sisters have become invisible after taking off the uniform." By noon, the military trucks had departed, but the impact of their presence remained. Raymond found himself surrounded by former comrades in arms, each insisting on helping in some way. His duffel bag was loaded into David's car as plans were, made for retrieving his remaining possessions from the storage unit he could no longer afford. Across the internet, the narrative was already shifting. The mocking video had been overwhelmed by footage of the veterans' response, carrying hashtags like "Respect the Uniform" and "Invisible Heroes." Not everyone saw the medal, but they saw the man. If you believe that's enough, let YouTube bring you back here again. 1 week later, the cafe had undergone a transformation, both physical and philosophical. A new sign hung prominently in the window. "Respect all. Ask before you judge." Staff underwent sensitivity training, and a permanent discount program was established for veterans and first responders. Raymond himself never returned there, despite multiple invitations and personal apologies from the owner. He preferred the quiet dignity of moving forward rather than revisiting humiliation. The apartment David and the others had arranged for him was modest but clean, a 1-bedroom unit in a mixed-income building with an elevator that spared his damaged spine the ordeal of stairs. For the first time in 18 months, Raymond slept in a real bed, with a door he could close, and a refrigerator containing food he had salvaged. He still struggled to accept help. Decades of self-reliance and the military ethos of strength made vulnerability feel like failure. But each morning, a different veteran would appear in the building's lobby. Some he knew from service, others connected only by the brotherhood of the uniform, insisting on sharing breakfast or offering rides to VA appointments. The cafe, meanwhile, had become an unexpected site of pilgrimage. Veterans from across the city made a point of visiting daily, ordering coffee and occupying the same corner table where Raymond had been refused service. They never discussed the incident directly. They simply existed in the space, a quiet reminder that their presence continued even when unacknowledged. On this particular morning, a young father and his son, about 7 years old, sat near a group of 3 veterans. The boy watched with undisguised curiosity as the men exchanged a salute before sitting down. "Dad," the boy asked loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "why do they salute when there's no flag?" The father considered his answer carefully, aware of the veterans listening. "Sometimes," he finally replied, "a man is the flag." The veterans nodded approval, and one offered the boy a small smile, perhaps the first time he'd smiled in public since returning from his final tour. Across town, Raymond sat in the small park near his new apartment, methodically sorting through mail forwarded from various temporary addresses. Among the official VA correspondence and bills was a handwritten envelope bearing his daughter's familiar script. He opened it carefully, unfolding 2 pages covered in Sophia's neat handwriting. "Dear Dad, I saw what happened online. The video from the cafe and then the veterans showing up. I recognized you immediately. Why didn't you tell me things had gotten so bad? All these months of letters, and you never said you were homeless. You wrote about moving around and exploring different neighborhoods, and I believed you were okay. I've withdrawn from classes for the semester. Don't be angry. I can re-enroll later. I'm coming home next week. You're not alone, Dad. You never were. All those years I was angry that you weren't there for my childhood. I understand better now what you were carrying, what you're still carrying. Let me help share the weight. I love you, Sophia. Raymond read the letter twice, then carefully folded it back into its envelope. For the first time since the incident, emotion cracked through his carefully maintained composure. A single tear tracked down his weathered cheek before he quickly wiped it away. His phone rang, the old flip model he still preferred over the smartphone David had tried to give him. It was Colonel Rodriguez, checking in as she did every few days. "Rodriguez, the housing is more than enough," Raymond said without preamble. "You don't need to keep calling." "Not why I'm calling, Sergeant," she replied. "The mayor's office reached out. They want to establish a veteran outreach program, permanent housing assistance, employment opportunities tailored for combat-related disabilities, the works. They need advisors who understand the real issues." "Sounds great," Raymond said cautiously. "Good luck with that." "They're offering paid positions," Rodriguez continued. "I submitted your name." Raymond started to refuse, his automatic response to any form of charity, before Rodriguez continued. "Consider this. How many others are still out there? How many won't have 50 veterans show up to defend them? This isn't about you anymore, Sergeant. This is about all of them." The park had filled with children released from a nearby elementary school. Raymond watched as they played, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world that awaited them. "My daughter's coming home," he said finally. "That's good news," Rodriguez replied. "Bring her to the meeting. Let her see what her father is building." That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Raymond placed a call to his daughter, the first time he'd initiated contact in years. "I'm looking forward to seeing you," he said when she answered. "And I think I might have found something useful to do around here." In the cafe across town, the evening shift was ending. The barista who had ejected Raymond was cleaning tables, when an elderly man in a worn jacket entered. The barista tensed, his new training warring with old instincts. But before he could react, one of the regular veterans stood up and approached the newcomer. "Vietnam?" the veteran asked, noticing a pin on the man's jacket. The elderly man nodded. "Join us," the veteran said, gesturing to their table. "Coffee's on me." The barista watched the interaction, then quietly brought over a fresh pot without being asked. The lesson had been learned, not through sensitivity training or new policies, but through witnessing the unbreakable bonds between those who had served, regardless of what they wore. Outside, as darkness fell, the city continued. Its normal rhythm, but in small ways change was happening. The invisible were becoming visible, the forgotten were being remembered, and Raymond Miller, preparing his apartment for his daughter's arrival, finally unpacked his duffel bag completely, placing his Purple Heart on the bedside table where he could see it, a reminder not of past pain, but of present worth. Some people wear their medals on their chests, others keep them in their pockets because the world stopped looking. But when one person stands up, a whole army might follow. Have you ever misjudged someone because of how they looked? Tell us your story below. We're listening. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where silence ends and respect begins. "No shirt, no money, no service. Get out!" the barista yelled as the man picked up his duffel bag and limped toward the door. People stared. Some laughed. No one helped. But at 8 a.m. the next morning, 5 military trucks sealed the block, and the man who was kicked out stepped out in full uniform. Ever seen someone humiliated just because of how they looked? Hit 1 if you have.